Europe engulfed in flames as wildfires spread rapidly. Hundreds of thousands forced from their homes, swaths of land scorched. Climate change has contributed to this unprecedented fire season, but what will it take to bring the situation under control? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Per Nyberg. Wildfires are ravaging many parts of Western and Southern Europe, with France and Spain among the hardest hit. The World Health Organization has warned that climate change is contributing to the frequency and intensity of these fires. Well, that's clear in the record temperatures and successive heat waves seen across the continent since May. France and Spain have deployed thousands of firefighters, and neighbouring countries have also sent assistance. Authorities say the situation is now unprecedented. So what will it take to extinguish these flames? We'll talk to our guests in just a moment. First, though, this report from Michael Apple.
This year's wildfire season in Western Europe is alarming authorities and scientists alike. The fires are spreading quickly, fed by dry vegetation and strong, hot winds, the result of successive record-breaking heat waves that started in late May. Numerous wildfires are burning in southwestern France, in the Gironde and Landes regions near Bordeaux, in neighbouring Spain in Madrid, Avila and the Valencian community, and in central and southern Italy. France has mobilized more than 1,000 soldiers to support emergency services in what President Emmanuel Macron calls unprecedented times, while several EU states have deployed assets to help control the spread of the flames.
We're not talking about a resurgence. We are talking about the spread of the fire that has been occurring for days now, and which spreads depending on the changes in wind direction.
Hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced from their homes in France and Spain. Some have joined the response operation.
We're very welcome here because we're arriving with a large volume of water and they really need it. We're refilling the large water tankers parked nearby, spraying water along the roadsides to help the firefighters in the areas that haven't burned.
The United Nations has again sounded the alarm, saying the intensity of the recent heat waves and the scale of wildfires are linked. And, as Al Jazeera meteorologist Everton Fox explains, persistent high temperatures will further complicate firefighting efforts.
Now, the heat is expected to continue across parts of southern Europe well into next week, keeping the risk of wildfires high. Scientists say Europe is the world's fastest warming continent, and as temperatures continue to rise, heat waves like these are becoming more frequent, more intense, and increasingly destructive.
In a recent report, the World Health Organization's Regional Director for Europe issued this warning about climate change. The guidance is published. The evidence is there. What governments do next is a choice. And this summer shows what's at stake. Michael Apple, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's go ahead and bring in our guests into this conversation. Joining us from Valencia in Spain is Eduardo Rojas, chairman of the board at the program for the endorsement of forest certification. In Bordeaux in France, Soraya Fettih, she's the global campaigns coordinator at 350.org, an international environmental organization focused on addressing the climate crisis. Also joining us from Exeter in England, Laurie Laybourn, the executive director of the Strategic Climate Risks Initiative, a non-partisan think tank. Thank you all three for joining us this afternoon on Inside Story. Soraya, let me start with you. You've already been evacuated once from your home in Bordeaux. You're back home now, but what was it like getting told to leave your home and all your belongings and go away because there was a fire approaching?
The whole situation is pretty unbelievable. We went from Friday morning from a situation where we felt like in Bordeaux, we were not really threatened by the fires happening near the coast, to in the span of a few hours being asked to be evacuated. At least only the western suburbs for now, and since then everyone is just in some kind of time stop, just wondering which neighborhood is going to be next.
Several hundred homes have already been burned in neighbouring Gironde. What's the situation like right now there in Bordeaux? I understand the fire is only about 15 kilometres away of the outer perimeter of Bordeaux. What can you see? What can you smell where you are?
As we speak right now, the sky turned from blue to grey again. It was the same situation yesterday and the day before it turned black. So we can smell the fire. We can see the ashes. When you walk outside, you breathe the pollution. The streets are filled with smoke. So the fact that the fire got so close and it's still so close is very worrying, because we know that yesterday the situation was a bit more under control because we had a bit of rain and the winds calmed a bit. But this afternoon, and that's why I'm worried that right now, seeing the sky being filled with smoke again, we know that the winds are going to blow towards Bordeaux again. So, yeah, we're expecting, or at least we're trying to be ready for the worst, unfortunately.
Eduardo, you're in Valencia, not far away from Castellón, where you have one of the two major fires in Spain. How bad is the situation there?
It's critical due to the fact that this area has a very complex orography, and the winds are blowing in the wrong direction in this moment. There seems to come some release from the weather situation in the next days, but nevertheless, this is an important nature-protected area, and as I commented, with extraordinarily difficult orography, few roads that allow the firemen to combat the fire directly, and with scattered settlements around. So it's a complex situation, at least for the next 24, 48 hours.
What would you say is driving these fires in Spain right now?
It's a combination of factors, and there are basically three kinds of fire situation. First, the traditional forest and forest land fires, which were those of last year. Last year was really complex in northwestern Spain and also in North Portugal. And this wildland-urban interface is extremely complex, and especially in areas that were built up in the 60s, 70s, 80s without corresponding city plan, with lack of infrastructure, lack of water availability to load the firemen, and with a lack of knowledge of the neighborhoods how to behave. And we had this first relevant fire in Almeria with important death toll of mainly foreign citizens. This is the kind of fire that doesn't burn a huge area, but creates a lot of hesitation. And the one in Madrid, west of Madrid, is of this kind, and most likely the worst that we have been tackling together with the one in Almeria due to the death toll. And then we have as well harvesters of cereal that crash with a stone, that generate a small lightning, and immediately all the cereal start to burn. And these forests at the end burn big agricultural area, which is a big damage for farmers, but even the spread either into urban environment or more into forest environment. And these three kinds need to be tackled in a totally different way, because their cause and their environment and conditions are incomparable one with the other.
So multitude of different factors. Laurie, this has been an exceptionally warm summer. Some countries in Europe are now in their third heat wave in just a couple of weeks. How much of this are you attributing to climate change?
So there's a clear signal of climate change supercharging these conditions. As we heard from Eduardo, any disaster is very complex. The causes are multi-layered, including how we build and how we use land and so on and so forth. But climate change is supercharging the conditions that make us vulnerable to things like wildfires. And that has been something that's been predicted now for many, many decades, and tragically becoming true in front of our eyes.
According to Copernicus, the European Union's climate change service, Europe is actually the fastest warming continent on Earth, with temperatures increasing twice as fast as the global average since 1980. Laurie, why Europe?
So it's to do with the way that climate change is enveloping the world and to do with various regional differences. For example, in the Arctic as well, another fast warming area of the world, the melting of the reflective ice and snow is then supercharging the heating that's going on there. So you have different but similar types of dynamics that exist across Europe. What's very important to stress, though, is that it's not just that it's the fastest warming continent, it's that a lot of the consequences are outpacing what governments and other key institutions are maybe planning for. So the conditions that we've seen with the heat waves and now these wildfires are beyond what many governments have identified as being the worst case scenarios that are possible at this moment. All governments develop what are called reasonable worst case scenarios to inform their planning. And in many instances, the events that we're seeing are going beyond even those. So what that tells us is that the tools that we've got, the analysis that is informing government planning is a step behind how fast climate change and then its supercharging of disasters is. And that should be a moment of profound alarm and reflection for particularly governments, because it shows them that this is much worse than they maybe would have thought, and definitely much worse than their planning and their protection policies have made us ready for.
Soraya, this June in France was the hottest on record. For you living there in southwestern France, what have you seen of these record-breaking temperatures in Europe and in France over the last couple of years?
What have I seen of them? In the past 10 years, the region has turned into like kilometers and kilometers of green lands into now what is just like dry lands, mostly yellows, very, very vulnerable to fires, to drought, to dying vegetation. These forests I grew up in, I learned how to differentiate from one tree to another, what is the biodiversity of the region. Right now, they are almost non-existent because of the repeated fires, but also the drought, because of the little means that we are receiving to maintain our lands and to anticipate from these things from happening. So heat waves after heat waves, especially here in the southwest of France, we are just experiencing what our new reality is now. It doesn't have to be our new normal, but these things can be anticipated and they can be mitigated. And unfortunately, we are just the witnesses of the lack of means that our governments are putting into these priority climate actions.
Eduardo, Soraya is talking about these trees in France where she is. I understand that Spain has actually gone from about 15% coverage of trees about 100 years ago, and now it's 40% coverage of trees in Spain. Is that also driving these wildfires, creating more biomass that can actually burn?
Exactly. There are several factors. There is not putting all the eggs in one basket would be an error. And one of them is, of course, the growth of forests, not only in land, but also in growing stock, in fuel that is available to burn, and the rural decline that is extraordinarily intensive in Spain compared to any other European countries. The common agricultural policy is very inefficient regarding these low-populated areas, that forests are set out of the financing of the common agricultural policy, and that everybody is free-riding forests, be for the water protection, for watersheds, for soil, for climate change. At the end, there is no financial return. People leave these areas, and this, together with climate change, generates the problem. And there is why it's important that we don't tackle only one priority. The important thing is that everything that is done also to reduce the continuity and the load of fuel is done in a way that is climate smart. This is the issue. Because if we only put on the climate change fighting, this is a global issue that would take around a century to drive downwards. And in this moment, we have to tackle also this really immense load and continuity of fuel that we observe in certain parts of Europe. It is not in all the parts of Europe, and how we can be able to revitalize rural areas, that extensive grazing, that extensive agriculture and forestry comes back, instead of the tendency that has been over the last 50 years to concentrate agricultural and livestock production into the lowlands.
Laurie, do you think that we've underestimated the risks of climate change in parts of the world, like in Europe?
Yes, we know that like I was saying just now, the risk assessments done by governments sometimes have not profiled or given emphasis to the very worst that could happen. A good example of this is that in the UK, where I'm based, the government's climate change risk assessment of 2022, released in January 2022, said that there was a 0.02% chance that there would be a 40 degrees centigrade heat wave before the 2040s. That had never happened in the UK before. 7 months later, it happened. And that shows you that it was possible to identify that the very worst cases are now actually starting to emerge as the normality and what we should expect. We also know from subsequent assessments, from modelling, from scientific modelling, that some of the heat extremes that Europe is experiencing is beyond even what the models thought was possible. So there has got to be, off the back of the extraordinary heat this summer and off these tragic and destructive wildfires, a moment of reflection and reconfiguration of how governments assess climate risk. They've got to be focused much more on the worst case scenarios of the most extreme things that are possible. And as we're hearing from both Eduardo and Soraya, we've got to then make sure that as a continent, adaptation to those conditions are absolutely a priority, an urgent priority, and crucially that does not come at the cost of reducing emissions. They have to come together, because the things that we need to make us safer today against things like wildfires have to be the same things that make us safer in the long term by reducing carbon emissions, because there are limits to adaptation here, and there is no way of us ultimately adapting our way out of this very dangerous, very tragic situation that we've now found ourselves in.
Soraya, we're only a few months away now from the COP31 meeting happening in Turkey, in Antalya. In the lead up to the Paris Agreement, there was so much focus on the climate. But do you feel that it's almost gone out of fashion now, that it's hard to get your campaigns to get any kind of traction for you as a campaign coordinator who work on these issues?
You know, about the two words that were missing from the Paris Agreement text, fossil fuel. It's been 10 years and we still have issues and problems tackling one of the main causes of climate change, one of the biggest emitters of global gas, and it's the fossil fuel sector. Yes, it's a struggle right now to continue getting victories. It doesn't mean that we have to give up, because the fossil fuel lobby is very strong, and the priorities of the governments right now is not necessarily to invest in climate action. In France, the budget dedicated to the climate action has been cut off from 15 billion euros just in the past 5 years, whereas the budget for the army has grown exponentially. So it has been made more difficult to get the laws we need, the program we need, the policies we need. It doesn't mean that we're going nowhere, but we need a strong political decisions to be made by our governments, by every government, to actually really tackle the issue at the speed and at the scale that is needed right now. And 10 years from the Paris Agreement, we're still so far from the objectives that were listed in this text. We can still reach our common goal to prevent the worst from happening. But unfortunately, if we continue on this path, we're gonna just suffer even more and even harder consequences. What we're experiencing right now in the Southwest and in Spain and in other regions of the world is already really bad, but it's unfortunately nothing to compare to what's coming our way if we continue to do nothing to prevent these emissions from happening, and to really put in place the just transition everywhere, in the north and in the south.
Soraya, you heard Laurie talking about government planning, how important that is. For you, living in Bordeaux, do you feel that the local government or the regional government, are they well prepared to handle these kinds of crises, both in terms of really hot temperatures and now this approaching wildfire?
I will circle back to the same main topic, the means that we are being given to actually tackle what's currently happening and what will come our way. I mentioned the Climate Action Fund at the national level, but the regional budgets have also been shaped the past few years. Our mayors or every institutions at the regional level right now are struggling to just fund what's needed to be done to implement the rules in terms of maintaining the forest, to diversify the forest. This requires money. We also need people to go and monitor if this maintaining is done properly. Again, they don't have the money, they don't have the budget to actually fund these institutions and these programs. So they're doing as best they can, considering the context, the political context we live in. But they need more. They need more support from the national level. They need more money to fight the climate impacts, but also again to anticipate what's coming our way and to prepare the people and the city and the rural parts of the countries for what's coming: the drought, the extreme weather events repeating and increasing in intensity. While our budgets are shrinking, we hear about the profits that the companies like TotalEnergies are making. A few days ago, they were announcing 5.4 billion in profits just for the second quarter of the year. With 5.4 billion, do you know what we can actually achieve just in the region? We would have more firefighters and possibly more water bombers that we are lacking right now. We're asking other countries to give us technical means and to support us. Some of our friends and family members are firefighters. Two of them died a few days ago in Mérignac fighting the fire. They need support. They are tired, and they used to protest to ask for more money, more budget. Well, hopefully they will be heard now, but we need more.
Eduardo, you talked about that devastating fire in Almeria. Last month, 13 people lost their lives. Now you have those two massive fires, both outside of Madrid and outside of Valencia and Castellón. Next week, forecast more high temperatures, no rain. What's it going to take to get these fires under control now?
Well, it has to be the break that will come in the next days. In some areas, it has started already with lower temperatures and more humidity and less winds. It has to be used to extinguish these fires and to be able to also have some rest for the firemen, and that they can be prepared for further weeks, considering that the nights start to prolongate, the sun is not anymore so steep, that all these issues might have. But in the history of forest fire record, July is the worst month in Spain by far. But last year it was August, and 89 it was September, October. So it may move to other parts of Spain as well in the next weeks. But we should also avoid to focus just only in the extinction. I mean, this is an important issue that we have learned from other policies and also in the SDGs, especially in the health and also in the security area. If you just focus on the symptoms, you get lost of it. It's like you try to solve the issue of heart attack and you think you need more ambulances and more cardiologists and more hospitals. What you need is that people follow a healthy lifestyle. And the same happens to rural areas. If they are in healthy situation, they are managed, they are vital, there are people there that manage this area, it will work. If practically these areas are totally empty or just with people with either pension people or IT nomads and people not managing the land, then with the present climate and with the past climate, we would have as well very big fires due to the continuity. And I put you just an example. Phylloxera affected the vineyards in Southern Europe from the late 19th century. Well, in the 20s and 30s, there were a lot of fires due to abandoned vineyards. So in the moment you have brush vegetation uncontrolled, fires start. So it's important that we have this under account. Yeah. Cork oak with the protection or serotine pines do not exist by chance. It's because in the past we had also quite severe situations.
Laurie, let me just bring you also into the discussion here at the end. I understand that when you have these kind of wildfires, in fact, they feed themselves in a way, because when the available vegetation burns, then you have both the release of carbon and you also have less vegetation to take up the carbon, absorb the carbon from the environment. So how do you break this cycle? How do you make sure that there's a way out of this?
Well, so yeah, you pointed out a pretty severe feedback loop there between the worsening consequences of climate change and what causes it. And I'm actually going to add to that a political type of dynamic that I think we should be particularly concerned about, which is that to date, many governments and politicians have not really paid much attention to climate adaptation. The politics of climate change is largely focused on reducing emissions. That is right. We have to deal with the root cause, as Eduardo and Soraya are saying. But what it has meant is that as we go into the era now of severe consequences of climate change for Europe, the politicians who are pro-decarbonisation are not well set up in some places to also be the people who can most credibly stake claim to being able to protect people. And that's a very dangerous moment that we find ourselves in for Europe, because it could mean, and we are seeing instances of this, that anti-climate politicians are the ones who are capitalising on worsening climate disasters, because they seem to be the ones who can offer some kind of alternative protection. So we've ended up in this quite dangerous political trap where there haven't really been that many political incentives to care about adaptation so far. They are now arriving. And there's a risk that the pro-climate politicians are blamed for being in charge as the disasters happened. And it could push people to vote for the anti-climate politicians. That
Laurie?
is the feedback loop, really. Yes.
I'm going to have to interrupt you there because we're out of time, unfortunately. But I want to say thank you so much for your time. Laurie Laybourn joining us live from Exeter in England. Also Eduardo Rojas, live for us in Valencia in Spain. And also thank you, Soraya Fettih, who's in Bordeaux in France. Do stay safe. We hope that you don't have to evacuate again, of course. Thank you all three. And thank you so much for watching Inside Story. You can, of course, watch this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, Per Nyberg, and the whole team here in Doha. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment. Stay with us.